there isn't any solid information on who could actually be the first ever serial killer. However, history is spattered with incidences of mass murder throughout the ages, some even dating back to the 3rd century BCE. How much of that is accurate can be debated upon, but having even a brief record of an occurrence such as this could indicate some form of truth. It's believed that the earliest examples of widespread murder date back to 331 BC and involved a group of 170 women who used the plague as an alibi for poisoning Roman men. All of the 170 women were convicted of their crime. So, who actually was the first serial killer? According to old records that weren't entirely accurate, the first recorded solo serial killer was a woman as well. Locusta of Gault was a poisoner for hire who worked for Agrippina the Younger, the mother of the Roman Emperor Nero. As a means of Nero gaining power, she was tasked with poisoning members of the imperial family as well as Agrippina's husband, the former Emperor Claudius. Locusta served as a poisons expert. According to historians, Locusta was already notorious and imprisoned on poisoning charges in AD 54 when she was ordered by the Empress Agrippina to supply poison for the murder of her husband, Claudius. The poison was sprinkled on a mushroom and given to the emperor by his food taster. When this poison appeared to be ineffective, the doctor Gaius Certinius Xenophon murdered Claudius with a poisoned feather, supposedly put down his throat to induce vomiting. She reportedly advised Agrippina to use Atropa belladonna as a poison. Atropa belladonna is a poisonous plant also called the deadly nightshade. Its roots, leaves, and fruits contain deadly toxins. The risk of poisoning has been evident because it's possible to confuse it with other berries. Atropa-derived poisons were commonly used in ancient Roman murders, and previous Empress Livia was reported to have used them to murder her contemporaries. Although her involvement in Claudius's death has not been fully confirmed during the early 1st century AD, the Roman Empire was in a monumental state of disorder that saw Nero's reign as emperor conclude with his ousting of Gaius Julius Vindex, a governor of Lugdunensis province who was unhappy with Nero's rule and wanted to reinstall a previous style of government last seen with Caesar Augustus. It's not known how many people Locusta poisoned during her tenure under Nero, but she was greatly rewarded for her efforts. When she was still imprisoned in AD 55, Locusta was called upon by Agrippina's son, the Emperor Nero, to concoct a poison to murder Claudius's son Britannicus. When this poison didn't work, Nero flogged Locusta with his own hand and threatened to kill her right away. She then gave him a faster-acting poison that worked. Nero rewarded Locusta with full pardon and large country estates where he sent students to learn her craft. He acquired poison from Locusta for his own use before Nero fled Rome in AD 68 and kept it in a golden box. He eventually passed away through other methods. After Nero's suicide, Locusta was condemned to death by the Emperor Galba during his brief reign, which ended January 15th, AD 69. Along with Nero's favorites Helius, Patrobius, Narcissus, and others, she was led in chains through the city and executed. When it comes to the first male serial killer, we have short evidence of a man who was convicted by the Roman government just 1 year later. A man known as Aspernas was charged with murdering an estimated 130 people. It's unclear what his motives were or what his preferred method was, though it has been suggested that he too used poison. As we have all learned, records were not meticulously kept in 70 AD. Both Locusta and Aspernas are considered some of the earliest recorded murderers, though very little information is known about the exact number of people they killed or over how long of a span of time the murders took place. Well over 1,300 years later, another man, who could be the first recorded murderer with arguably more information about his wrongdoings, Gilles de Rais, a Breton nobleman who was born in 1404, had nothing else unusual about him, apart from his career as a soldier in the 100-Year War and as a comrade in arms of Joan of Arc, which would have been good enough to add his name to the history books. However, his achievements can be seen only in the shadow of a secret life he led as the perpetrator of more than 100 child murders. This rampage made him arguably the first serial killer in recorded history. Records say that de Rais was an impetuous and hot-headed young man, characteristics that translated well to the battlefield, where he was by all accounts a skilled and fearless fighter. He was assigned by Charles VII to watch over Joan of Arc when she appeared on the scene in 1429. In some major battles of her short career, the two fought together, including the lifting of the Siege of Orleans. He was appointed Marshal of France in 1429, the highest military distinction in France. When Joan of Arc died in 1431, his military career began to wind down, and he spent more time at his estate, which was among the richest in western France. De Rais spent his fortune recklessly, paying enormous amounts for decorations, servants, and a large military retinue. He also commissioned music and works of literature. His sale of family lands to finance his extravagant lifestyle sparked a bitter fight with other members of his family, especially Jean de Craon, who left his sword and armor to Gilles' younger brother, René, when he died in 1432. De Ré became increasingly concerned with religion and his own salvation. In 1433, he financed the construction of a chapel he called the Chapel of the Holy Innocents, and which was staffed, horrifyingly, in light of de Ré's crimes. And he also sought to save his rapidly collapsing finances by investigating the occult, employing a series of alchemists and sorcerers. Many children had disappeared from the areas around de Ré's castles, and it appeared that many of the disappearances were connected to the activities of de Ré and his servants. Parents would have been unaware of their children's fates because it was common for young boys to be permanently separated from their parents if they were taken on by nobles as servants or pages. The murderous preferences of de Ré may have become something of an open secret in other areas. During his trial, it came out that witnesses had seen his servants throw out bodies of dozens of children at one of his castles in 1437, but families of the victims were afraid and didn't want to do anything because they were considered lower class. De Ré wasn't caught until September 1440, when he kidnapped a priest after a dispute that wasn't connected to the murders. After he was tried in both church and civil court, he was found guilty of heresy, sodomy, and the murder of more than 100 children. Under threat of torture, de Ré confessed to the charges and admitted to how he tortured dozens of children who had been kidnapped by his servants for nearly a decade. He was executed in Nantes on October 26, 1440 by simultaneously burning and hanging. De Ré had been calm and collected when he was put to death. Bizarrely enough, this brought him late commendation as a model of Christian penitence. People were actually remorseful of his death. 3-day fasts were even observed after his death. Ironically, this started a tradition in Nantes where parents would whip their children on the anniversary of de Ré's execution. This might have been to show them how serious his sins had been. This practice is thought to have survived for more than a century after he died. Throughout modern times, revisionists have questioned whether de Ré was truly guilty of the crimes for which he was executed, noting that his confession was extracted using the threat of torture. However, most historians would have examined the evidence from Ré's trial, however, continued to believe that he did, in fact, commit the murders. Although de Ré could have arguably been the first ever male serial killer, and Locusta of Gay could have been the first female serial killer, there's another character in history that stands out as one of the first. Lavinia Fisher, born 1793, was an American criminal who, according to urban legends, was the first female serial killer in the United States of America, and incidentally, one of the first in the world. Both she and John Fisher were convicted of highway robbery, which was a capital offense at the time, not murder. Some historians are questioning the validity of the traditional story about Lavinia Fisher and are asserting that she never killed anyone. However, she was a member of a large gang of highwaymen who operated out of 2 houses in the back country near Charleston, the 5 Mile House and the 6 Mile House. It's not clear whether the 6 Mile House was a hotel, but it served as a hideout for numerous outlaws. She would invite lone travelers into the 6 Mile Wayfarer house to dinner and ask them questions about their occupations, trying to determine if they had money. She would take them to their rooms with a cup of tea. After the men drank the tea and went to bed, her husband would go to the room and beat them until they were almost killed. A different version of the legend said that the tea would only put the men to sleep for a few hours. When they were almost asleep, Lavinia would pull a lever and the bed would collapse, causing the victim to fall into a pit. Spikes were waiting at the bottom of the pit, according to some. Factual details are hard to find because much of what actually happened in the alleged murders of John and Lavinia Fisher had become wildly exaggerated. However, contemporary news accounts in the Charleston Post and Courier claimed that a vigilante gang went to the Fishers' neighborhood in February 1819 to stop the purported gang activities occurring there. The group returned to Charleston after they had finished their job, but they left a young man named David Ross to watch over the area. Ross was attacked by 2 men early the next day and dragged before the gang that had terrorized the region. Among them was Lavinia Fisher, to whom he sought assistance. Instead of helping him, she choked him and then hit his head through a window. Ross was able to escape and immediately told the authorities. Another traveler named John Peoples asked if there were any vacancies. Lavinia replied that there was unfortunately no room, but he was welcome to come inside and have tea. John was a fan of tea, and not wanting to appear rude, he dumped it when she wasn't looking. She inquired for hours and finally informed him that, in fact, they did have a room. He then went to bed. He was worried about being robbed and felt suspicious about the interrogation, so he decided to sleep in the wooden chair by the door. At night, he woke up to the loud sound of the bed collapsing and discovered Fisher's plan. He immediately jumped out of the window and drove to Charleston to alert the authorities. Based on these 2 accounts, the assailants were finally identified by name. something that law enforcement had previously lacked. Lavinia and John were located along with 2 other gang members during the ensuing investigation after police were dispatched to the location. John Fisher surrendered the group in an effort to protect his wife and shield her from possible gunfire. He again attempted to protect Lavinia during interrogation by providing the identities of all involved in the gang. A full year passed between their arrest and execution. At their arraignment, the Fishers pleaded not guilty, but were ordered to remain in jail until their trial, which would take place in May. Their co-conspirators were released on bail. They were found guilty of highway robbery, a capital offense, after the jury rejected their pleas of innocence. However, the judge granted an appeal, and they were given a reprieve until the January session of the court. During this time, the Fishers occupied themselves with plans to escape, as they were housed together at the Charleston, South Carolina jail, or the Old City Jail, in a 6x8 cell and not heavily guarded. On September 13th, they put their plans into action and began their escape. As the rope they had made from prison linens broke, Lavinia was left trapped in the cell as John was set free. He gave up trying to escape and was caught again. The 2 were then kept under much stricter security measures. Both were sentenced to be hanged on February 4th, 1820, after the Constitutional Court rejected their appeals. While waiting for execution, John accepted the counsel of the Reverend Richard Furman, a local minister, but Lavinia became even more bitter. John Fisher was executed by hanging in front of the Old City Jail. Before his execution, Reverend Furman read aloud a letter John had composed. In the letter, John stated that since he had become Christian and he could not be executed with a lie held to his account, he insisted that he was innocent and asked for mercy for those who had wronged him. Fisher then began to plead his case before the Goddard Court of 2000 after the minister read the letter. Afterward, he appeared to contradict himself by asking for their forgiveness. According to legend, Lavinia believed that she would be pardoned until the moment she was hanged. She used her last breath to scream, "If any of you have a message for the devil, tell me now, for I shall be seeing him shortly." She then jumped off the stand and killed herself. Her ghost is believed to haunt the old Charleston jailhouse, and tourists still claim to have seen her ghostly apparition. We might not categorically know who the first serial killer was, whether they be male or female. History has a long list of culprits who can take up that murderous achievement. For now, it's safe to say that we won't be seeing these people commit crimes ever again.